Hello again and welcome back to Teen Tuesday. I'm Andy Blalock. Hope you're doing well. And we're starting a brand new series today. We just ended one on relationships. You're welcome. I'm just kidding. And now we're going to do one on something that's very near and dear to my heart and something that I know that a lot of you have questions about, you've asked about, and you hear a lot of sermons about, especially when you go to youth conference and things like that. And this series is going to be on the will of God. Yes, the will of God. You've heard about it a lot. There's a lot of books written on it. The 5 ways to know the will of God for your life. It's a very marketable term. And to some, it seems like a very elusive concept. What is God's will? But what I want to do in this series, and it might be 3, it might be 4. It depends on how long it goes. But I want to cover all the bases on this is not something that has to be mysterious or strange or cause stress, because it does. I remember as a teenager when I went to youth conference in the wilds and things like that, I would hear a lot of messages about the will of God, but actually would fill me with anxiety and fear and trepidation because I'm like, I don't know what God's will is. And it's because I had the wrong idea of what God's will is. It's not something that's complicated. Just like everything else when it comes to God's economy, His will for your life is not complicated. It's not confusing. And it doesn't have to cause you a single day of worry or anxiety. It doesn't. It doesn't have to. But like everything else that we do as people, we complicate and we add complexity to things that are so simple. And really, it takes away from the wonder and the joy and the expectation of it. There's a lot of things in God's Word where it talks about His will, like this is the will of Jesus Christ concerning you. Always be thankful. Always be filled with thanksgiving, for this is the will of Jesus Christ. And on and on. I could list a whole bunch of verses, but I want to directly reference the things that I know that influence teenagers about God's will, the things that you're worried about, the things that cause you stress, and honestly, the things that sometimes adults try to put on you about God's will, and say, I don't know, okay? Or when you hear something at youth conference. And again, this will be multi-series, and I pray it's a blessing to you. These are things that I wish I knew when I was a teenager. And, preachers, pastors have tried to tell me these things, but, teenagers, we don't listen, right? And I hope you do. I hope that this is a blessing to you. I'm going to read my life verse, actually. And it's Proverbs 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thy own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths. The first thing I want to talk to you about when it comes to God's will. Here's the 4 ways you can, I'm just kidding. Only $30. I'm just joking. The very first lesson is one about vocation. Vocation, which basically means what you're doing with your life, your job, your career, your path, your destiny, whatever, your vocation. Especially in America, we put almost 100% of our identity in what we do with our life, what we do for a living. When you're on a date, it's one of the first things that's asked. It's one of the first things that adults ask you in church. It's one of the first things that you're grilled about when you're in high school. What are you going to do for the rest of your life? It's very interesting to me that a lot of people who don't have their own life in order, or they have no idea where God's leading them, they always like to ask you, well, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? How are you supposed to know that question, the answer to that question, when they don't even know, right? But that happens all the time. And for some reason in our society, it's seeped into us to just put pressure on teenagers that you need to know exactly what you're going to be doing for the next 30, 40, 50 years of your life. Which, if we were being honest, if everyone was being honest, the answer would be, well, I don't know. It depends on what the Lord wants, right? But it doesn't really work out that way. We think that we can map out our entire life, especially when it comes to our career, our path and what we do. But I want to encourage you and I want to remind you that your identity is not what you do with your life. Your identity is found in who you live for. Who do you live for? There's a lot of engineers, a lot of lawyers, a lot of doctors, a lot of police officers, a lot of politicians, a lot of pastors, a lot of burger flippers like I was when I was a teenager, who are doing the exact same thing that you'll be doing. But the key distance, the key separation between you and them is, who do they live for? And who do you live for? There's so much pressure on what we're supposed to do with our life when it comes to earning a paycheck, right? Like, what are you going to do? What's going to be your job? But really, that's not what matters to God. Do you know that? That your vocation is not what truly matters to God, but rather where your heart is. What are you going to do with that vocation? Someone once said that God's will is like a contract, but the contract is completely blank. There's nothing inside it because you sign your name at the bottom and you let God fill in the rest. But is that how you view your life? Like, God, you can do anything you want with my life. Just fill it in and I'll sign on the dotted line. He doesn't fill it in first. You don't get to read everything that God wants to do with your life, because that would be faith. That would be seeking God's will. Like, let me make sure this contract is something that I want. Okay, I don't want to do that. I don't want to suffer that, right? That's how we want to live. But true faith, following God's will with our vocation, is simply seeing a blank piece of paper and signing on the dotted line and say, God, you fill in the rest. Because I got news for you. Your vocation can change. You may have parents and they'll tell you, or you know people, or you will know people, or yourself, where you had a plan for your life. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm going to pursue this career path. And in a moment, your vocation can change. Your entire life's direction can change. But you know what doesn't change? Your purpose. Who you're living for. Don't let your entire life and your life's purpose be just on your vocation, what you're going to do. But focus on who you're going to live for. That when you're doing these things, what's the purpose of it? If you're going to live your life just so you can graduate college and get a nice job and earn a lot of money and then get a nice 401k and then retire in your sunset years, do you realize that you're just living like everyone else is in the world? There's no difference. There's no significance. There's no power. There's no purpose behind that. There's nothing wrong, obviously, going to college, getting a great job, getting a 401k, retiring. Absolutely nothing wrong at all. But there's something more for you. God has a will for you, and it is so much more than just what the title is at the end of your business description or on your name badge. It's so much more than that. And there are some people, even your age, who absolutely know what they want to do with the rest of their life. And there's some that don't. And you know what? I was one of those people. When I went to college, I had a totally different major. I had no idea what God wanted to do with my life. And I want to tell you right now, as you're listening, it's okay. It's okay to be that person. There may be some people at church who are uncomfortable with that. There may be some friends who scoff or mock at that. But it's okay. Because God is going to fill in those blanks for you. You just have to trust Him. Like He did for me. I had absolutely no idea. I have no discernible talents. I'm not good at this, can you tell? I'm not a YouTube personality. I didn't know what God wanted for me because I couldn't perceive myself in any single job thriving at it. But it didn't matter because God had a plan and a purpose for me. I just had to trust Him. And there are some of you who know exactly what you want to do with the rest of your life. And you know what? That's fine too. It makes no difference because the question is still the same. Whether you have no idea what the next step is or you know exactly, you have a plan, 5-point plan of how to pursue that career path, whoever you are, the question is still the same. Not what are you going to do, but who are you going to live for? Because I got news for you. If you're going to be an engineer, that's great. But are you going to be an engineer who lives for the glory and the honor of God? Because there's a lot who don't. A lot of lawyers, a lot of doctors, again, politicians. Because the world would be changed if every single career, every single vocation was filled with someone who purposed not just to be that person and to be the best of that person, of that job, but someone who wants to give God the most glory. That's the people who change the world and turn the world upside down. Because the world doesn't just need more seats filled, doesn't need just more jobs, filled in. It needs believers. It needs the gospel being spread. And that's what gives you purpose. I know a lot of people who are lawyers, who are doctors, very prestigious, the highest in their field, immensely intelligent, and they would tell you that none of that matters. And the thing that gave them the greatest joy in their life was sharing the gospel, was going to church, was fellowshipping with other believers, doing the ordinary things that you do right now and that I do. Because our joy and our fulfillment does not come from our vocation. The world will try to tell you that. Man, if you can just make it into this industry, if you can just achieve this career path, man, you're going to be fulfilled and happy. But what truly gives you satisfaction, what truly gives you peace and joy and strength is whatever that vocation is, you're serving and you're centered in the will of God. God's will for you is not so much what your job is going to be. It's that you give your life to Him. Your body is a reasonable sacrifice. It's your reasonable service. You present it as a sacrifice, which is your reasonable service. It is as this life verse. You simply trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. Your own understanding will tell you, well, you should do that career path or this. You should go here or do that because you'll make lots of money. That's your own understanding. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, lean not unto thy own understanding. In all your ways, whether that way is to be a doctor, that way is to be a burger flipper, that way is to be a preacher, in all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct thy paths. God is going to lead you to where you're supposed to be. So stop being so stressed about your vocation. God will fill those blanks in for you. It's like, well, that's easy for you to say. I got bills to pay. You're a teenager, but maybe you do. I don't know. You will one day. But just how God has provided you salvation, God is going to lead you every step of your life. He's going to provide for what you need. Maybe not what you want, maybe not your greeds, but definitely your needs. So stop being so worried about your vocation and start being worried about your calling, which is serving and loving God and trusting Him with your life. I know this one went a little bit over, but I really want to impress on your heart that God's will is not something that's complicated. It's something that's so simple, but it's something that we reject sometimes because it's something that causes us, number one, to be sacrificial, to let God fill in the blanks. And also, number two, we have to put more trust on Him. It's scary. It's scary not to know what our future is. Even if we have a plan, to know that maybe that plan won't work out. And I'll talk about that next week, but just know that God's will for you is to trust Him with all your heart, to acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths wherever you go. Don't be stressed. Don't be filled with anxiety. God's going to lead you. If this year hasn't taught you anything that plans change, well, then nothing will. But the good news is, even though plans may change, God never does. And neither does our purpose to want to love and to serve Him. So do that. Be filled with the peace of God and just trust Him. So again, I hope you're doing well. Always praying for you, and we'll see you next time on The Will of God. And until then, God bless and thank you.